Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell Classic workshop. And this time round we're looking at a car that I've possibly worked on almost as much as any other type of car, and that is a Bentley S1. You may have noticed that I'm extremely carefully colour coordinated. This is totally by chance. I came in wearing this today, and instead of putting the customary Tyrrell's Classic Workshop t-shirt on, which are available on Shopify, I decided to maintain the rig out that I have on because it sort of matches the car. So that's that. I started off my working life in a Rolls-Royce and Bentley service centre, and 90% of the cars, not all of them, but 95% were Rolls-Royce and Bentley. So I'm not exactly sure how many of these I've worked on and driven, but it's probably in the hundreds over the last 40 years. So to a certain extent, forgive me for sounding blasé, and it's not meant to sound like this at all. Familiarity has sort of brought contempt because there's so much I can say about these cars, and I actually don't know where to start and how to condense it into a video. I certainly don't want to regurgitate stuff that's sort of out there and known already, particularly. So there are a couple of unusual tips for owners along the way, or those aspiring to own one, or those who are interested. So yeah, this is a standard steel Bentley S1, and I think I've forgotten some of the colour palette, but I think it's velvet green over smoke green from memory, which were part of the standard crew colour palette at the time. And interestingly, one of the immediate things to say is that obviously it's two-tone. The Bentley cars, to make them more sporty, which hardly describes this type of car, but just to make them look more rakish, to use a very old English adjective, they actually, this crease, this bulge in the body here, ends with a little curve in front of the radiator, behind the radiator shell there, and it's also only this bit that is the upper body colour. So the Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud 1, which was just about identical apart from the badges, was actually two-tone all over. So you would have this colour green on the bonnet tops as well. And this would carry straight through to the radiator shell. So if you are looking at one, an easy identifier, of course, people respray them and do different things, but this is the Bentley bonnet. It's also curved to match the radiator shell. And on the Rolls-Royces, it's slightly curved, but of course you've got the Greek Parthenon type famous Rolls-Royce radiator shell. That is slightly more straight. So it's very difficult to take a Bentley S-type bonnet and put it on a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud 1 and vice versa. But this car represented something of a transition for crew. It can sort of trace its roots back to the 1920s, really. The engine is the inline six-cylinder engine, which Rolls-Royce used for many years. A lot of car manufacturers use these engines for decades. Jaguar XK, various other engines, small block Chevy, of course, comes to mind. Two interesting measurements inside the engine. One was the distance between the engine has a bit in the middle, but either side of it, the three cylinders, the distance between the bore centres was 4.15 inches. And it was in this engine right the way through, from when this engine was developed in the 1920s, 1922, I think, for the 20 horsepower Rolls-Royce. It was Rolls-Royce's first sort of entry-level model. And if you can call a coach-built Rolls-Royce of the 1920s an entry-level car. But it started off with this straight six engine, 4.15 inches bore centres between the back three and the front three, slightly bigger in the middle. And the other dimension is 4.5 inches. That's the stroke that the piston goes up and down inside the bore. Of the nearly 40 years that this engine was in production, those dimensions never changed. Never changed. And the engine went through 4 or 5 different capacity increases from 3.2 litres up to 4.9, and those dimensions never changed. So it was quite well known for that, and there's lots of engineering papers about that. But in the late 1950s, Rolls-Royce realised that they'd reached the development limit of this engine. They'd used a very Complex vibration damper on the front of the crankshaft with spring-loaded weights and things like that to help smooth out the third order vibration characteristics of a straight six engine. But they had at 4.9 litre, which was not available in the standard Steel Saloons, but in the Continentals, these are actually 4.557, I think. That engine was not, the engine reached its development life at 4.9 litres, so something else had to happen. And sweet the engine still is, even in its 4.9 litre form. I mean, this is Rolls-Royce, the makers of what at the time was the most refined car in the world, arguably. The engine was still very smooth when it was all working properly. The vibration dampers tend to age and springs go weak and break and things like that. This has got the last development of the straight six engine in what's called the standard Steel Saloon form. Continental was more powerful, but as I say, 4.9 is against 4.5. But the reason why I'm putting this car on the video is it's not the most glamorous or exotic or attention-grabbing car in the world, but it is a particularly nice example of a standard Steel S1. It's very largely original. In fact, I think the mileage is original on the car, which is 60,000. For that reason, it's just a beautiful, beautiful car. The engine is very sweet. We had some visitors, some very esteemed visitors who came to visit the workshop recently, very discreetly, very secretly. I'm not going to say too much, but these were top level in the car echelons of the world. I can't say any more because I'm trusted with this information and I do not want to betray that trust. And they were very taken with this car. And I'm going to start the engine in a little while and you can hear how absolutely smooth and quiet it is. And that's how they should all be and how they all started life. And unfortunately, a lot of these cars did get a bit ratty because they were worth next to nothing for years. I remember seeing an S1 for restoration for £650 that my dad and I went to look at in the late 70s. I mean, so very few of them have actually gone through the tube of decades of care and use and ownership and actually come out the other side unsullied, unspoilt, unmolested and largely immaculately maintained and in beautiful condition. This car is largely, as I say, it's largely original. All the panel gaps are exactly as they should be. And again, this is unusual for S-types and silver clouds. All the chrome is in very nice condition as well. So yeah, just a beautifully honest, old, original car. The S1 is surprisingly sprightly. People sort of say, oh, it's less powerful, and the engine develops. The crew were very coy about power outputs around the time of this car, but you're talking 150, 160 brake horsepower, which is laughable. I mean, a family saloon develops that these days, which is less than half the weight of this car. But it's the torque, it's the smoothness and the torque and the effortlessness with which it's done that makes a big difference. So we've been doing some work on this car, just little things like adjusting things here and there. The driver's door had gone slightly out of adjustment with age. Same with the passenger's door, the latching mechanism. So let's just take a look at a couple of things and see what we find. Well, this, as I said earlier, is what's called a standard Steel Saloon. And the other models in the range, the non-standard cars, are what are called coach-built cars. And this was the last Rolls-Royce and Bentley built with a separate chassis with all the running gear on it underneath the car. So you essentially in the old days, you bought your chassis, specified it to a certain length, because they did different lengths for different purposes, sports, limousine, etc. And it came with the radiator grille and a bulkhead and next to nothing else, really. And what they did was actually build the body and lower it, or build it up with an ash frame and aluminium in the very old coach building days. And they would, the likes of H.J. Mulliner, Park Ward, James Young were the three later surviving coach builders in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s. And Hoopers sort of went along the wayside as well. They developed some beautifully exotic designs for these cars. Same under the skin, some detailed differences with the front brakes, slightly more powerful engine, as I say. I'll cover the coach-built cars in another video, and I think we've got some examples of some that I've worked on over the years, or we've had in the workshop here, some beautiful coach-built S-types and clouds. But standard Steel Saloon, the doors, coverings, the skins, the bonnet and the boot are all aluminium. Rolls-Royce's philosophy was if the owner had to touch it or move it, it had to be as tactilely light as possible to operate. So very few silver clouds and Bentleys, for the reasons I've explained, lack of proper maintenance and upkeep and know-how, really, actually work properly. But I'm going to show you this. This is just a delight. This is the driver's door, lovely push button. And again, this was well known with hotels in London. The doorman wanted a firm handle to get hold of, which very few modern cars have. It's normally lift up or pull that way to actually, so they could control the movement of the door while people got in and out. But look at that. Isn't that just magical? In fact, I can probably do that with my little finger. There you go. That is quality coach building. It's compressing the rubber seals, which is normally the reason why doors don't close like that. In fact, I remember in the 1970s VW Beetles, the door seals on them were so efficient. If you didn't close the door with the window down a bit, it was twice as hard to close the door as it was if the air was allowed to escape through an open window. So beautiful. Same on the back door. Just lovely. Look at that. Stunning. Well, one of the delights about this car is that this is the original Connolly leather from 1958, and it's Connolly Vomol, which was the best that they could do, of course. This is VM3234 beige, as it was called in Rolls-Royce speak, and it's never been Connollised, it's never been touched. It's just beautifully, beautifully original. Some figuring and some cracking here, but not cracking actually, just cracking of the actual the colouring, not the leather. The leather is still fabulously sound. And yeah, just still a lovely, again, for it to have survived like that is incredible. Obviously, the woodwork is all original as well. And the steering wheel, which still looks like the day it came out the factory. This is the thicker rim steering wheel. As far as I can remember, power steering became standard in 1959, and they had a very, very thin steering wheel, and this thicker steering wheel was for the cars without power steering. But this car has got power steering. I suspect it's been retrofitted, actually, but I couldn't confirm that. I might just have a look, just when I can't sleep one night. Yeah, it's just beautifully original. The carpets again, this is all bound with the VM3234 nitrocellulose. You can't make leather coating like this now, because it is nitrocellulose. It was done that way from the factory, and now it's all water-based, still with the solvent-based lacquer, but water-based dyes, and they just don't have the bite that the solvent-based dyes did. I'm going to just show you another thing that is quite interesting. Well, something else that is an absolute delight on these cars is the obviously the jack and the wheel brace and everything is here, but this is in the days, don't forget, people still had chauffeurs when these cars were built. They were still chauffeur built. Look at that. a complete original toolkit with the correct King Dick spanners. There you are, sir. A spanner with your truffles. And of course, the correct way to close the boot lid is this. We don't slam boot lids and doors on Rolls Royces and Bentleys, or we shouldn't do. Well, this car is the exception. We've got another Silver Cloud and S-Type in here, and we're going to use some filmed roll of that to show what I'm talking about. But in this car, it's got this sunroof in, which I suspect was fitted very early on in the car's life, because the whole headlining has been changed to accommodate it, which was a big job, actually. Craig's doing the headlining on another car we've got here, but normally it's wool cloth. This is a textured vinyl. But what I was going to say was the sun visors are, again, anybody who owns these cars or wants to own one, people just push them up like that, up to the roof. And what happens is the sun visors actually form an imprint in the headlining. Just dirt, and if the car's old, it's maybe somebody's been smoking in it or something. But you tend to start to get an outline of the sun visor on the headlining. So a little tip is just do that and just pull it down, and that stops that stops that happening in an instant, just like that. We were taught that. I had the privilege to be working. The atmosphere was very Rolls-Royce and Bentley focused, so the Rolls-Royce School of Instruction was still, as it was rather grandiosely called, was still in operation then, and this was the sort of thing they taught. They taught us that just things like that, little tips all over the car. Don't slam the boot lid, just let it drop. If it's adjusted properly, it will function perfectly on its latches either side, that sort of thing. So we'll start the engine. I'm going to just have a listen to the engine, and then we'll take the car out for a drive. Well, this trusty 6-cylinder engine is really, obviously we have electric motors nowadays, and you can't get much smoother and quieter than that. But back in the mechanical world, this is one of the epitomes of beautiful engineering smoothness. And this engine is now over 60 years old, and as far as I know, is largely untouched. So it is not perfect, but it's still pretty good. And of course, we take for granted with modern cars, with hydraulic tappets, with cylinder blocks and major engine parts that are developed by laser beams to get rid of noises in the internal structures and things. There's all sorts of whizzy CAD technology available nowadays, which make modern car engines super quiet mechanically. But in fact, what they've done now is re-engineered some noise back into them. In fact, some cars actually have acoustic augmentation now inside the stereo system speakers to actually make the engine sound raughtier than it is. But anyway, I digress. So I'm going to start this engine up now. It's sort of warm, and this is it's just a delight, this engine. It really is. I shall say no more. There is the slightest tick from the valve gear there, but it's very quiet. It's an F-head engine, as it's called, so the inlets come in through the side and the exhausts go actually underneath. So the exhaust valves are vertical with the head there, which actually causes them to wear quite a lot, because any oil that would have gone down the valve stem, if they were that away up, isn't there. It gets blown down by the exhaust gases. And I suspect these are probably the original exhaust valve guides from 1958. So a remarkable piece of engineering achievement, really. And no wonder my very important but unmentionable people who came to visit recently were so enamoured of this car. As I say, there are far more exotic Bentley S1s in the world. There are far more exotic Bentleys in the world. But this is a jewel of a car, and I think it's high time that we actually took this out for a drive Oh, well, here we are in the driving seat of the Bentley S1 standard steel saloon, as supplied by Bentley in 1958. And it's quite interesting. One thing I've observed over the years is the ebb and flow of Rolls-Royce versus Bentley. Which one is the more popular? And when this was built, it was Rolls-Royce that were the favoured make, largely because a huge percentage of these went to the States. And I think it was as high as sort of 60 or 70% of production went to the US. And they favoured Rolls-Royces. The Bentley didn't really have the resonance there or the prestige that the Rolls-Royce did. This was a very different era. This is the era when Rolls-Royces were admired. People doffed their caps at them when they wore caps. I mean, it was a very different world. And consequently, Rolls-Royces were in favour. And this car was actually £90 cheaper than a Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud 1. Which, as I say, is otherwise identical. It's just the RR on the instruments instead of B and badging to suit. And that was it, called badge engineering. Jaguar and Daimler did the same in the 1970s. In terms of driving, I mean, these are not the most, surprise, surprise, not the most rewarding cars to get on the door handles round a corner. But it's quite interesting because the chief of engineering at the time was a chap called Harry Grills, and he was very conservative, as a lot of people at Crewe were then. Probably, dare I say it, too conservative. They were very dogmatic, and that was actually the dogmatism that plagued the engineering department, in particular at Crewe, actually was one of the reasons that led to their downfall, really. They shunned alloy wheels. The styling department, there was this tension between Graham Hull in the styling department and the engineering department. Engineering wanted alloy wheels, for example, and styling put them off and put them off and put them off for years. Which did not help, really. That may be a miniaturized version of what was happening in the British motor industry at the time, and unfortunately caused a lot of it to go the way it has, i.e. cease to exist or be owned by foreign companies. Anyway, be that as it may, this is a lovely place to be. And one of the fruits of Harry Grill's very conservative engineering was the vagueness in the steering, which they were, Rolls-Royce and Bentley were sort of famous for at the time, really. And Harry Grills called it the sneeze factor. So if you're driving along and you sneeze, I shall now demonstrate, that's you! You might move the steering wheel one way or the other. And as you can see, it hardly alters the trajectory of the car at all. A modern car would be off the road if you did that, and that was because he maintained that if you sneezed, it was very bad. You're liable to have a crash if the steering is anything like directly connected to the road, and consequently we ended up with a lot of vague Rolls-Royce and Bentleys. They went a long way to redressing that with the Shadow 2, excuse me, the Bentley T2 era. Which they actually brought rack and pinion steering on, and it transformed the car, really did. But anyway, I digress. I'm knocking it down from 4 to 3 here, which is also something else that we were taught in the Rolls-Royce School of Instruction, just to actually check the weight of the car and the roll of the car. I put it into 4th, and then coming up to a corner, just gently tip it down into 3rd, and it actually uses a bit of engine braking to check the weight of the car and set it up for the bend. And yeah, it hardly rolls at all, this car, at slow speeds. It's just a lovely place to be. I mean, can hardly hear the engine. This obviously has a modified clock because you can't hear it ticking. Either than that, or maybe the clock has failed to proceed. We never know. yeah, I mean, it is lovely. You know, I'm joking apart, this is a fabulous place to be. I wish we could bottle the smell of that beautiful old leather and wood and all the rest of it. It is just unbelievably delicious, the smell. Fabulous. And yeah, the engine just purring along. We've done some work on the ignition system, which was playing up. That is now sorted with some new points and condenser and other bits and pieces. We've also done some work on the cooling system, which is behaving itself beautifully now. The gauge is right slap bang in the middle, the needle of the gauge. Great. Yeah, a very, very civilized place to be. Unless the road is very rough, the ride is actually still acceptable, bearing in mind modern cars, to make them actually handle well, so that the turn-in is good on modern cars, so they enter the bend and don't sort of lurch and roll at all, is quite firm, the ride on modern cars. And this is really no firmer than a modern car. Of course it doesn't handle like one, but it's not too bad at all. One upgrade on these is radial ply tyres. They were supplied with cross-ply tyres from new, which really are not wonderful. Radial ply tyres are superior, but they do make a difference to the car's handling. It really does. They transform it. They really do. And the indicator switch here is on a timer. It's on a clockwork timer. So it's not determined by steering wheel movement. It is actually a little clockwork mechanism inside. You'll see it'll pop back any second now, he says. There we are. Thank you, Jeeves. You can just tell, I mean, even though the steering is deliberately vague, the throttle linkage, the braking system, I spoke about the braking system in a previous video on the Bentley S2, the model after this, very similar apart from the engine. And even the way this works, there's no play in that whatsoever. It's just like a hair trigger on a lovely expensive rifle. Just beautiful. Just pressing on a bit now, which is most unseemly in a car like this, but it will actually take it. Provided these are set up properly, you can hustle them round. Yeah, very windy today. Yeah, quite satisfying actually. We've got a beluga flying overhead of us. Being near the airfield that we are, but you know, I'm not going crazy here, but I'm not hanging about either. Just small inputs. You can actually surprisingly hustle this car, really. A bit of left foot braking. Not too bad at all. Very few Bentley S-Type and Silver Cloud owners would drive their car like this, but it can actually be done. Drive it hard, it can. So, yeah. There it is. This is a beautiful example. As I said, we've worked on various coach-built cars, which are the next level. These body panels are pressed steel. They were pressed by Pressed Steel Fisher in Cowley near Birmingham. And the hand-built cars, such as the H.J. Mulliner Flying Spur, I mean, we can bring up a couple of photographs of coach-built cars that we've worked on over the years of this generation. They are a next level again, but one of these days, next time we have one in, we'll do a video on it. It's just on an ad hoc basis as the cars come in, as I keep saying. It is a working workshop, and We never know from one minute to the next what's going to arrive. Well, that concludes another Tyrrell Classic Workshop. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for joining us, and please like and please subscribe. We'll be back with something else very soon.